We can do all things together through Jesus.
Today in our Connect groups, we're going to be discussing, I believe, a very challenging, very important topic. We're going to be dealing with how we can find peace with parental guilt. I don't think there's any doubt or question that one of the most challenging things we're called upon to do as Christians is to train up our children in the way that they should go, to bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. And as Christian parents, we take that challenge very, very seriously. And the fact of the matter is that all of us, I think at times, feel like we've failed in some areas of parenting. And we have to deal with the guilt that goes with that. And sometimes perhaps that guilt is warranted. I think often it's not. And I want to share with you briefly 3 observations that I hope will help guide the discussion today, along with the notes that Steve has given in discussing how we deal with parental guilt and putting that into perspective. First of all, I think it's very important to keep in mind that as human beings, we're not perfect. Right from the very beginning, from creation, right on through all the biblical accounts, if there's one thing that's driven home, it's that we're sinners, that we're fallible, that we make mistakes. And I think, therefore, that it doesn't make much sense for us to expect to be perfect parents if we're not perfect people. If we're not perfect people, there's no way that we're going to be perfect parents. And that's not making an excuse, okay, for the mistakes that we make and wrong priorities that we establish, and when we lose our tempers and those kinds of things. But I do believe that it's an important explanation for why, as parents, we're not going to be perfect. And so there's really no sense and nothing gained by beating ourselves up over the fact that we haven't been perfect parents, because we're not going to be. I mean, bottom line, we're not going to be. That doesn't mean we can't try. That doesn't mean we can't seek to do the very best job we can, because we love our children, we love the Lord. But the fact of the matter is that if you hold yourself to some perfect standard, you're going to be beating yourself up all the time, because we're never going to meet that standard. We're human beings. Secondly, I also believe that it's very, very important that we not focus on our failures as parents, but that we also keep in mind the successes that we have. I was rereading a book by Philip Yancey, and the book Yancey talks about meeting a father who has 4 children. 3 of the children have turned out very, very well. 1 child is a drug-addicted, alcoholic mess. And the father laments how most of his attention and most of his focus is on that child. Now, all of us want our children to turn out as good, solid Christian people. I mean, that's what we want. That's our desire. That's what we're seeking to accomplish. Sometimes that just doesn't happen. And when it doesn't happen, when our children don't follow the path that we want them to follow, I think it becomes too easy sometimes to focus on what we consider the failure, rather than look at other children who have found success in their walk with the Lord, who are living godly lives and following the path that we have shown them and set for them. I think a big mistake that a lot of parents make, and I think it's important to stress this, is, you've raised 3 or 4 children, and they're following the Lord, and they're doing His will, and you've got one who's not. And too often, what I've seen through the years is parents' focus is on that one child, on that one that they want to see walk with the Lord, that they want to see walk in a straight fashion, and they're not. And in the process of that, they ignore the others. And that can cause some real problems in sibling relationships and in parent-child relationships. It can build some real resentments that way. And that's not what you want. And so I am by no means saying ignore the wayward daughter or wayward son, but I am saying that if you have children who are walking with the Lord and following Him, you've done something right. You have shown them the way. And don't lose sight of that, which brings me to the third point. And the third point is that we need to understand that we are all free moral agents. From the very beginning, when God created us, He clearly planned for us to be able to choose what's right or not, to choose Him or not, and He gave us free moral agency. Now, that is a tremendous blessing, but it's also a tremendous challenge. And I've said for years, repeatedly, my parents should bear no guilt whatsoever for the moral and spiritual mistakes that I've made, because they showed me and they taught me what was right. They raised me up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. They showed me the way that I should go. They lived it, they taught it, they shared it. Now, they weren't perfect, but there is no way in the world that I could ever say that they didn't show me and teach me what was right. And so if I made moral mistakes, if I did things that I shouldn't do, it's not their fault. I knew better. I just chose not to do better. And when our children break our hearts, when they disappoint us, when they head down paths that we didn't raise them to head down, paths that we don't want them to go down, that is not an indication that we have failed them. That's not something that we should necessarily beat ourselves up over, because there comes a point when they have to make moral choices. In Luke chapter 15, in that parable of the two sons, the one we call the prodigal, clearly in that parable, the father represents our spiritual father. How could you possibly argue that that father hadn't raised his child in the way he should go, that he hadn't shown him how he had to live? And the kid rebels. The kid rejects it. The kid makes poor moral choices and goes off into a far country and wastes his living in riotous living, it says. I mean, it happens. But that burden does not rest on the father. That's the responsibility of the child. The child was shown how he should go. He chose to reject it and move in a different direction. That is not the failure of the father. In fact, if you'll think about it, isn't that exactly how our spiritual father deals with us as his children? He shows us the way. He gives us the guidance that we need, but he leaves the choice up to us. And we can choose to follow him or choose not to. And it's the same way with our children. And so as you begin this discussion today, I would just urge you to keep these 3 points in mind. Number one, remember, as parents, we're not perfect. Okay? We're going to make mistakes. That's life. That's the way it is. Number two, don't focus on what you consider to be your failures with your children. Don't forget the successes as well. And don't ignore the quote-unquote successes to focus only on the failures. That creates more problems than it solves. And thirdly, please keep in mind, ultimately, all of us are free moral agents. All of us make decisions about our priorities and where we're going to go in life and what we're going to do. If you have given your child that path, if they know how they should walk, if they've been shown that path, then ultimately the choice is up to them. I hope this will help to serve as a springboard for your discussion today. God bless. Thank you.
We can do